These are lovely women who have written, I think, important books which look at difficult questions and themes. And so, huge round of applause to them. Let me kick off this session by asking them about their writerly journey, because two of them are journalists and one is from Rheea is from MFA background and a social working background. So, like, this would be an interesting conversation if we came to know how did you come to write the books you did.
Hello? Yeah. Hi, everyone. So when it comes to, I'll be quick. I'm not going to bore everyone. My writing, when it comes to my writing background, I think since I was a child, I was a big reader. I used to read everything I could. And I always felt like I was observing people. And I don't know. I was very voyeuristic, if you ask me, as a child. I like to read about weird things. But I started writing in my early 20s, and consistently, persistently, lots of rejection. Well into my 30s, started with short stories and got into novels in my mid 30s. So it was a while.
Yes, Prajwal.
So I'm a journalist. I'm a sports journalist, but I think I'm a more physical person than I am. So my thing or my romance with words didn't begin with reading. It actually began with writing. I always wanted to write more than I wanted to read. So that's how it began. And then I loved sport. I loved it to madness. I just loved it. I would play all the time. I would play anything that I could play, but it had to be movement. There had to be movement. And somehow, finally, I think it was my romance with sport that led me to romance in writing. And so from almost, I think from my 30s, I was very sure that I wanted to write a romance novel. So that's where I came. I wrote my first one in 2018, and The Way We Were, my second one, was published just recently. So that's where I began.
So for me, I think writing began very early. I wrote bad poetry when I was 13 years old, I think was my first brush with it. And then I always knew I would write because I was one of those kids that did well in like English. That was the only subject that I didn't get yelled at for in PTAs. I think that for me, it took a while to realize that I just needed to find my form. I always knew that I would write fiction in some way, shape, or form, but I wasn't sure. I mean, I knew that I couldn't do that for a living, sadly. So journalism seemed like the next, like, smartest thing to do. And I loved it. I stepped into it completely by accident. I loved it. I found the process of just investigating reportage really, really interesting. And I think for me, I read as much as I wrote, but there's something about writing that's just incredibly therapeutic. And I think that one of the things that helped shape me was a writing course that I took in my master's. Because we were talking about this earlier, we were talking about whether an education in it can shape you. I don't necessarily know if an education in it can shape you, but I had a particular teacher who was very like influential. So yeah, I've had a long tryst with writing.
Wonderful. Since we've come to the point about education, so Rheea has an MFA, and do you, all of you, feel that education in writing, can writing be taught? Being learners can take different forms, or do you think you should attend workshops? You also host workshops, and you know that works for a lot of you. Or maybe one inspiring writer who could mentor you. What I mean to say, are you a learner? And what kind of learning? Like we talked about how American style of formula writing, teaching writing, doesn't really work for many people. It does work for some, but well, how are you as a learner in the craft?
So I'll tell you something quickly about my own experience. I got my MFA in 2011, And about 3 or 4 years right after that, I stopped telling people I had an MFA. There's something called the MFA writer. It is a template. It's like, we were talking about this, a very American way of writing something, writing a story, and how it's appreciated and how people think it's going to be popular. I feel like you absolutely do not need an MFA to be a writer. You have so many opportunities online. You need good people around you. You need to be exposed. You need to be interested and find community more than anything else. For me, I was glad that I could do an MFA. It gave me 2 great years. And because had the privilege of doing an MFA, which a lot of people don't do. My parents lived in the US. I was able to do that. And I don't think it's a huge expense that puts you as a writer, where you first of all don't have many ways of making money. I don't think an MFA in 2023 necessarily gives you any extra credit. It's really about who you are, what you're reading, what you're writing, and what you're trying to put out to the world.
So did my BA in journalism in Mount Carmel College, and it wasn't, so did I need it? I'm not really sure, because I really loved sport. For me, it was, I cannot even begin to explain that, because I would watch under 10 tennis, under 12 tennis, pot-bellied kids running around the court. I didn't care. I loved movement. So I was really in love with that. And I read a lot of journalists at that point, which I think helped me a lot. I read a lot of sports journalists. I read a lot of people who wrote on different things, but I read the short word more than I did books. But could I have then gone on to write this without, proper training in writing? I'm not really sure, but I think there are 2 things that worked in my favor as when I became an author. And one thing, I think my first book was, I didn't really have a really good editor. Didn't go through good or constructive formal phase. But in my second book, The Way We Were, I had 2 really great things happen to me. One was Shiny Anthony, and the other was my editor in Hachette, Abhivyakti Singh. I think they really helped me. And I learned in those months more than I did about writing in all my years of writing, really, of putting down the written word. I did not learn as I got in that phase more than I ever got in my life. So I think what I want to tell you, anyone aspiring to be writers in any form, invest in finding the right person. Invest, take your time. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon and beyond. It's an ultra marathon. Take your time.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think having the right person, being involved, giving you the right kind of feedback, because the opposite can also happen. If you meet someone that makes you believe that you can't be a writer, and if you care about their opinion enough, then you won't be a writer. And that can be very, very dangerous. It's like a therapist. It can shape you and break you in many more ways than people realize. But I think one part of your question that I found really interesting was, can writing be taught? And I have a very controversial opinion on that, which is that no, it can't, but it can be honed. I think that you have to have some base level of... The problem with writing is that everyone thinks they can write. Like the minute that you talk to people about having written, people will instantly offer, the own material that they've written. And I think that's what makes it tricky, which is that there isn't enough value given to the skill because everyone thinks they can do it. And I think that what's important about writing or training in writing is that it doesn't teach you how to write, but it teaches you how to write well or how to write better. It works with what you've been given and it harnesses it to make sure that you're doing the best work that you can. Like for me, the influential professor I talked about, one of the most important lessons I learned was, please don't believe that everything you write is gold, because it's not. You have to be willing to write something and throw it away. You have to be willing to say that what I write on Tuesday might be much better than what I write on Thursday, and I can't put them on the same level because sometimes I'm going to be good and sometimes I'm going to be terrible, and being terrible is part of the process. So I think that just giving yourself leeway, understanding your own process is a very key part of learning to become a good writer.
Oh, what lovely answers for that. And I really think you should have the courage and the the strength to kill your babies, right? So now I would jump into particular questions to the writers about their book. Now, Rhea has written 2 books. One was The Body Myth and The Girl Who Kept Falling in Love. Body Myth is about mental health issues, and The Girl Who Kept Falling in Love is about relationships, of course, and it's also about bigger issues that are constraining the authoritarianism that is constraining the society today and driving the society apart. So with these overarching issues, was it tough to make sure that the humanness of the story came about? Secondly, how did these themes suddenly come to you and you decided to write about them?
Yeah, thanks. So a lot of people think of the title of my book, The Girl Who Kept Falling in Love. It sounds like a rom-com, but it's, a lot of people are like, oh, when I tell them it's also about the rising Islamophobia in India and how activism is, taking new shapes and forms, both, critical and, the wonderful ways that internet activism has made a lot of us more aware about the world, how we think, our prejudices, our biases. So those are some of the themes that are very much within the book. But how I came to those themes is this: I've always been interested in that part of looking at how the world is so similar in certain ways when we come to identity, when we come to authority, when we come to just following the rules because we are taught to follow the rules and because of social conditioning. This book, looks at a kind of a point of a love story, or many love stories, that is also going through a probable or possible reality that India might be looking at the way things are going. I still think it's also very relevant with what's happening right now in the world. Prajwal and I were talking about the fact that we are also at a space where, as writers and people who are writing about the human experiences, and we are also witnessing one of the worst genocides in the world in Palestine. And I think we should be able to mention that at all spaces and people to take note of that.
Oh, that's a lovely response, Rhea. Thank you so much. And now my next question is for Saumyaa. So in your book, One Night Only is described as a sex romp, but it does talk about these 4 friends and their relationships and their sexuality. And the chief protagonist, Natasha, she's a bisexual, and how that affects her relationship with her partner. Now, my question is, it is very close to being an autofiction. How difficult was it to write it? And did you discover something about yourself when you wrote this book?
So I think the interesting thing was the thing I did discover about myself when I wrote. So I'm bisexual, and my protagonist Rubani is also bisexual. But it is about her and 3 close friends who are in 3 very different relationship structures. And I think what I discovered when I started writing it was, up until that point, I had figured out that I was bisexual at the age of about 25. And I hadn't really talked about it to anyone except my partner and like a couple of other people. And I just felt like it wasn't something I wanted to talk about at the time. And when I started writing this book, I started writing it in the pandemic just for myself. And I realized that I wrote this character as bisexual without even thinking about it. And I think that was the first time that I realized that I do want to have this conversation. I do want representation in books. I do want a character that speaks to other bisexual women and gives them the confidence to be able to talk about it. And touch wood, one thing I feel very grateful for is that since the book has come out, there have been a lot of bisexual women who've written to me and said that they've resonated with the book and with the sort of stereotypes and troping that we deal with. But there's also just been a lot of women in general who found little pieces of themselves in the characters. And that was a big part of why I wanted to write something that very categorically wasn't a romance, but was about relationships. Because I think romances are delightful. They're amazing places to sort of like settle into. They're cozy and comfortable and fantastic. But For me, the experiences that I'd had with the world, relationships were uh, very complex, very nuanced, very layered, very problematic, very turbulent, very beautiful in that turbulence. And that's what I wanted to explore through my characters, which is why each of them has a different relationship structure. Somebody is single and chooses to be single, and it's not about, oh, I haven't found the right man, I haven't found the right person. It's, I prefer to be single. My life works for me like this. And there's a character who is in a non-traditional marriage, and that works for her. So I think what I really wanted to do and what I was excited about was putting the idea out there of relationship structures that I wasn't exposed to growing up, and saying that it's okay. It's okay to choose a path that works for you. And it's not going to be easy. People are going to make things difficult for you. But I feel like as writers and as people who create, it is our job to make it more and more okay. It is our job to normalize it, to put it out there so that when you as a person are reading something or watching something, you see yourself in those characters. And then it bolsters you to be able to be yourself.
That's a wonderful reply. I think bringing out different sorts of relationships and accepting them is a very important thing. Now, for Prajwal, my question is that she has written in her books, one of her books is about rivalry. It's based on sports that she's so passionate about. And the second book is centered around a newspaper office and the life at the newspaper office. And it's really nice and breezy. It also has the theme of finding your roots and about life in a newspaper office and about relationships. So when you're writing about true life experiences, when do the lines get blurred between characters and incidents? And are you comfortable with writing things that actually happened and that people would know about?
So I think with with the way we were, I was I used the newsroom setting is because I was most comfortable with the newsroom setting. I have decades in newsroom, and I know exactly how it works. And I wanted the setting to be like I knew it like the back of my hand. And so the protagonists in my book are both journalists, and the other thing that I really wanted to go to was the Anglo-Indian. And the third thing was Bangalore, which I thought was really, really important. I wanted to give readers a Bangalore that was there, and I wanted it to be remembered forever. So that part of Bangalore is really real. And the Anglo-Indian community, I thought they were a huge part of Bangalore while we were growing up. It was the vibe of Bangalore back then in the 80s. And everything that is really fabulous about the city comes from them. A lot of what is fabulous about the city comes from them. So these are the three things that I wanted to establish, vis-a-vis the setting. Well, it comes to how much of me was in the book. I would say these are not real incidents. What you experience in a book, what you will read in the book is not real, but they're real only in terms of it can happen in a newspaper office. These kind of pressures, rivalries, these horrendous exchanges we can have at deadline. We can call each other names and then, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. So we can call each other names at 10 minutes to 9, and we can go out for a drink at 11, okay? So it's that way. We don't hate each other, but at that point, it's just like, get off my back. So it's like almost violent scenes about deadline that you see in newspaper offices. That is what I wanted to recreate. About me, what is there in the book is I love to run. I love coffee. I think every single journalist loves coffee. So yeah, so that, and I'm completely clumsy. So I think those are the three main things that Myra Rai has about me. But I really don't think anything more than that is there about me in this book, I think.
Thank you. I think it is a high pressure job, journalism. Now, my next question is that we do tend to write about the settings that we are most comfortable with and the stories that come naturally to us. So have you thought about going to some other subgenre within this genre? For example, historical fiction or rom fantasy or some other subgenre, maybe non-fiction or short stories, for instance. Have you even thought about that way? Yeah, we go back to the same.
Yeah, actually, so with my first novel, The Body Myth, I did reach out of my comfort zone, and I had to write about French existentialists. And that, I mean, I really knew nothing. So I just went for 3 months researching, reading, YouTubing my way. And if you read that book, you'll think I know a lot about a lot about French philosophy. If you ask me today, I have no idea. So I think there's a certain thing about what world you inhabit for real, and that those parts of you come through your writing, your lens on the world. And then there are the parts that you absolutely can work for to bring in research, to bring in, to bring in another element of magical realism. And these are parts that may work or not work depending on who's reading you and what they're getting from it. But I like, for me, I think it's always interesting to put a little bit of challenge to already what I know, but I like my comfortable settings in terms of people and places that I know.
For me, I'm going to challenge myself in the next one, and I'm already struggling because one of the protagonists is from the north of our country, and I know I speak very, very little, and whatever little I speak is horrendous Hindi. So I have to really put myself in those. I'm not saying in his or her shoes, and really figure that out. So this part was easy. My first two books, one had so much sport, and the second one had a lot of romance, and in a setting that was home to me. The next one, I'm all the time, I'm writing a sentence, and I'm like, oh my God, or I'm calling friends, I'm saying, is this how you say it, or is this how it works there? So yes, so I'm really pushing myself, and for me, taking myself out of the comfort zone. I have a day job. I have a job that pays my bills. So I cannot let that go because that was one thing I was very clear about. I didn't want anyone, I wanted to pay for my art. I wanted my art to stand alone. So it was important that I continued having a job, which I love, of course, and while I wrote, the romances that I want to write. So yeah, so it doesn't give me the time to experiment that much, but maybe really in the future I will.
I think for me, the setting that I chose for One Night Only that I was comfortable with was weirdly not a professional space. It was a city that I'd grown up with and seen change, which was Goa. And I've been going to Goa since I was 6 years old, and I've been going with first my family, then my friends, then partners, then on my own, then to meet friends that I developed as a network over there. And I've just seen it change and grow and burgeon in so many different ways that to me, it was exciting to write the parts of Goa that most people didn't know, which is why I took my characters to Goa. And I really enjoyed writing that. But yes, of course I cheated like everyone does. And I put my characters in media because I'd had experience with those media spaces. So it just came naturally. And also because I didn't feel like their professions were part of the book, but not the focal point of the book. So I think that I did kind of lean into a setting that I was familiar with. But I'm doing in a lot of ways, I resonate with what Prajwal said, which is that I also have a day job as a journalist. And that is going to, in some ways, I feel like that's going to feed into what I write. And I don't know if that's a bad thing, because it's an exciting industry. It's interesting, it's full of characters, the kinds of people I meet every day. Like, on an average, I will be at a bar in Goa and meet someone that deserves a book of their own. Because there's so many people that you meet in daily life that and it's very hard not to steal from them, It's very hard to be like, you know what, I'm going to write a version of you. I'm not just going to lift you up ad nauseum. But I think that I do, and I am challenging myself for the next book. I am breaking with a narrative that I know well to try a narrative that I have never done, God bless me. And I have no idea how that'll turn out, but that's part of the fun. And I think that because I learned to be able to throw things away or to be able to step away from something and come back, I think that becomes a big part of whether you can experiment or not. Because if you find yourself experimenting and failing, and then you give up, then you're never going to be able to experiment. So, I mean, whether I actually succeed or not, we will see in 2024.
That was a lovely responses from all the panelists. And yes, we do try to, include the characters that we know. And my secret is sometimes I change their sex. My mother is there in most of my books. She doesn't know it. It's a secret. It's a secret joke that I have because she might get offended. So the next question is that all of you have these and this is the last question. After that, I hope we'll have some questions from the audience. What a lovely audience today. So my last question is that you have very strong female characters, all of you in your books, who are very, they're no coy kind of people, but they're very upfront with their choices and their sexuality. How do you develop your characters? Is it a sort of an exercise where you sit and write everything about the character and then start writing the book? Or does the character develop itself as the book goes on?
I mean, I grew up from a generation where, women were always told that we have to be liked. And I think writing about women just who have opinions or look at the world in a way differently are seen as aggressive or unlikable female characters. This is something we're discussing. And I think this is a big tussle that, the narrative is completely changing, and we are able to, be absolute whole beings witnessing this world in the way we are, right? And so for me, I think the biggest problem is like, a lot of my characters are not really likable, and when I say not likable, some of them are really shitty people. It doesn't matter if you absolute shitty women out there, right? But the point is that can you write them unabashedly as they are, without this feeling of that, my readers must love this person, or this woman must be loved or cherished in this way. And I think that's the biggest thing that I had to work through, especially in my writing in my 20s, and then it became very liberating in my 30s to write about that. So the biggest challenge, I think, is your audience generally. Are you able to have a conversation with them, and are you able to lift up biases that we both have, all of us have?
My response is very similar to Rhea's, in that I was very sure I wanted to kill the alpha male forever, in my books at least. So that is something I was driven by. And, but I also wanted to show all kinds of women, because there are all kinds of women that takes to make the planet. So I have in The Way We Were, I have a friendship that failed, and I have a friendship that sparkles, because that's really the truth about friendship, right? We drive the wedge into each other at times. We can, and we can do that and still bring the best out of a person. So that really is the premise in which I work with my characters. And that doesn't mean Andrew Brown isn't the hottest man walking on the planet. He is. So all of you looking for a great romance, pick it up, because I didn't want Andrew Brown to save Myra Rai. I wanted them to walk together, not one lead the other. And that has been an important premise of my book, that they walk together. So that really is the only real prejudice that I was fighting or trying to create.
Yeah, I think what Prajwal said is really interesting, because for me, it was, you said killing the alpha male, right? For me, it was creating the alpha woman. Because for me, I just wanted women that were very comfortable being themselves, and being themselves in all their flawed glory. Because when you read the book, all 4 characters, I think 3 of them are likable and 1 is not. I think my protagonist is the least likable of them all. And I think the reason she's the least likable is because she's the most flawed. So most people will see themselves and the things that they don't want to face about themselves in that character, and that becomes uncomfortable. The other 3 are definitely more likable. But I think it's like what Rheea said is really important. It's important to write women that are flawed, because for years, women have been whittled down to a trope. They have been the sort of side characters in a man's story. And unless it's a romance, which is a genre-specific thing where the woman is allowed to shine, right? But I think it's about time that changed, because it's really scary that with all the progress that you have in writing, people still haven't figured out how to write women. So people either write women as a side piece, or they write women as like these unbeatable like characters who can do anything, they can break through any wall, they can, and women aren't like that. We can be strong while being fallible, we can be beautiful while feeling incredibly ugly, we can be beautiful and be incredibly confident in our beauty. We can be intelligent and feel stupid, and vice versa. And I think that one thing that was important to me was to write these women as people. Like people that you would see and meet and be interested to know more about. And for me, the biggest part of the process that helped was that I did write my characters first. They did change along the way, to answer your earlier question, which is that I suddenly found, but I wrote down like aspects of my characters that I ended up not even needing. Like, what kind of coffee does Rubani drink? Does she even drink coffee? What fragrance does Faiza use? And it doesn't, sometimes it comes in, sometimes it doesn't. But in my head, I needed these people to be like living, breathing flesh. And once that happened, I found that I knew instinctively what a character would do. I knew how a character would react. I knew whether something was strange for a character to say. And if I saw it there, I'd just be like, no, but she wouldn't say that. So I think that for me, that was one of the most exciting parts of writing those characters, which was feeling them become real people. And when that resonated with people, I think that was very exciting for me.
Well, thank you.